Welcome to Deal Shredders. We are your hosts, David and Greg.
We are local Nashville investors, cash buyers, and real estate agents who love to analyze your deals.
In this week's episode with Brad Smotherman, we discuss how the structure of a deal is more important than the purchase price, including owner financing details and buying subject to. Tune in to hear about all the details.
Guys, we are so excited. Welcome to Deal Shredders episode 3. We are here with our good friend and the man, Mr. Brad Smotherman, who is going to be talking about why the deal structure is way more important than purchase price. And he's going to go over some ways that he does some owner financing and create some notes. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of a couple of good deals he did.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Brad, why don't you go ahead, Dave, and...
Yeah, so, no, you're good. So, Brad, tell us a little bit about your business. What's your background, how you got into investing, and kind of how you got to where you're at right now?
Yeah, so, I mean, to kind of put it in perspective, I started in the real estate world when I was 17. So, one morning I woke up when I was 17 years old and decided I was going to get into real estate sales. So, I joined was it Trees at that point, Tennessee Real Estate School or something like that.
Got your real estate license?
Got my real estate license when I was 18. My first 6 months, I was a dismal failure as a salesperson. I made $1,800. Now, guys, I don't care how you budget. If you're 18 years old, $1,800 gross
it does
not cut the bill. So, that being said, beginning of 2006, I had a builder developer pick me up to learn new construction and development. I ran a model home, and I did that pretty much until 2008 when the crash happened. And the crash taught me a whole lot of different things, great lessons that I saw that I didn't have to, personally endure. And so,
were you just selling at that time, or were you leveraged in properties?
No, I had nothing. I mean, I was still in college, so I was getting my undergraduate degree in accounting, and so kind of what happened is my builder developer went under, just like a lot of builder developers did. And it was that lesson that showed me not to deal with bankers. So even today, I have zero money of bank financing in my business because of what I saw him deal with. And to put it in perspective, the basic idea was that he had borrowed a development loan that was probably a $3 million loan that he'd paid down to maybe $750. And at this point, the auditors were coming in from the Fed and saying, okay, local bank, you're way over leveraged in real estate. You're going to have to call loans. And so what the banks decided to do was call the loans that they thought would hurt them the least. So my builder developer, he was like paying down the debt more than what he had to do, but then he had the best loan to value. And so whenever they decided to call a loan, they called him. Well, there's no financing for development loans during this time. So it broke him. And so at that point, I was like, okay, maybe dealing with banks is not the safest or best thing. So that's why I deal with a lot of private money. But all that to say, I went into accounting for a short time. I lasted for about 33 or 34 days. And I say that time frame because I got my first paycheck. And I was so disappointed in that. Plus, the partner at that firm was a guy that was not super nice. And I wasn't interested in being yelled at. And so my fiance at the time was like, now wife, was like, well, just quit. You don't like being there. You've worked hard to be an accountant. You don't like it. Just quit and go back into selling real estate. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, it's the worst real estate market since the Great Depression. Like, it's a really difficult time to get into this. And she was like, you'll figure it out, And
and you'd also like gotten an accounting degree, right? Like you'd gone through the whole system of
correct.
Like go to high school, go to college, get the degree, follow the track to like get out of school and do the American dream, whatever that is. Yeah,
and it wasn't really the money, because I started off from college making $40,000 as an accountant doing tax, and that was okay to learn. But I'd actually made more the previous year selling real estate, but it was a different market. But I mean, she believes in me, guys, like more than I believe in myself, and so it's just she was super supportive. She was like, go back into selling real estate, and so that was 2008. And so
perfect timing.
Yeah, terrible timing. And so that spring I began to pressure wash houses, which is what I had done in high school. So I started a business pressure washing houses. So I'd done that with a college degree in accounting, pressure washing houses to like fund this dream of real estate.
So you and a buddy or something, or just you by yourself with a few guys, or?
I don't remember at that point. So, back in college or back in high school, I had a good friend of mine, still a great friend, probably my best friend in the world. That we were partners on this pressure washing business. and I can't remember if he was involved at that point or not. Probably not. So it's just I'm pretty sure just me going out pressure washing houses to make ends meet. And at the beginning of 2010, I retired my real estate license just to do investing. Having never bought an investment property, because it was, for me, I was going to appointments, guys, and I was like, okay, I can buy your house for this, or I can list it for this. Well, you can imagine what happened. I didn't buy anything.
They wanted to list because
but I
make
listed
more money.
Stuff. Yes. And so at that point, I was like, look, I've got to find a different way. Let's take my foot out of the door that is selling real estate. Let's commit to investing. And that was beginning of 2010. So about 8 months later, I hit my first deal, and then it started to snowball from there.
So you're doing the side hustle, power washing to basically pay the bills, and then
Correct.
You're grinding. At that point, you're starting to market,
Yes.
starting to find deals. I'm assuming in the Nashville market, Murfreesboro market?
This was Murfreesboro. So I was like the bandit sign king of Rutherford County for like 4 or 5 years, up until they fined me twice. And so
people caught on to what they are, and everybody started doing it.
Well, and so looking back, like hindsight's 2020, I had so many transactions I should have done, but I didn't, because I didn't know what I was doing. And but then the market pretty much like recovered and made every bad decision for an investor in 2012, 13, and 14 into a great decision.
Yeah, because it was just everything, like appreciation was like covering any mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. And even today, you have some people that are not very smart people that aren't making great decisions, in my opinion, because I've been through the crash, that are doing okay. And anybody can do okay in like a quickly appreciating market. It's the downturn where you find people out.
Right.
Yeah, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's not
Certainly.
difficult.
Especially it's like, me and Greg have worked on transactions in North Nashville back when Buena Vista was like coming up. And it was almost impossible to outrun that appreciation. So, I mean, I passed on... So, here's a quick story. I passed on a lot for $90,000 on North 16th. Like 4 or 5 houses from Buchanan, okay, for $90,000. A build too. And I called a friend of mine, who's a good friend of mine today, and said, hey, you might want this lot. He ended up buying it for like $90,000. He sold it for $135,000. 3 or 4 months later, and that's how fast things were going up.
And now they're $180 to $190.
I don't know, but I hated to ask
because you're not buying retail.
But it'd make me sad that I didn't buy that lot for $90,000, because I mean, he's a friend of mine. Just said, "Hey, do you want this? You can take it for $90,000."
Cool.
2 builds are $80,000 to $100,000 over there right now.
Well, that's good
or per bed, but anyways.
Oh yeah, well that's good to have your background. I know, like kind of what you brought you to this level. But is there like anything that stands out this year that you kind of want to dissect and tell us what you learned and
Well, in real estate, things are ever changing, and you never know everything. So, what I see right now that I think is really interesting is I'm seeing kind of a stabilization in the marketplace. So we're not on this rocket ship in terms of equity. Now, we're still appreciating, don't get me wrong. But I'm also saying this from almost a national perspective, because at this point we've bought 19 states. So we're buying in multiple states, multiple markets, and to also put it in perspective, my idea of a good transaction is not one where I'm wholesaling a property. It's not one where I'm buying a house and I'm fixing and I'm flipping, although I do some of that. My ideal transaction is a transaction where I'm buying a property with great terms, and then I'm offering owner financing on the property. Okay? So it may be something that people don't really know what that means, and we can jump into that if that's helpful. But
well, maybe start at like a deal. Like how did you... Like anything that stands out, how did you bring yourself, and why did you decide to do that strategy?
Yeah, so the reason that I decided on this strategy was in 2010, there was no equity to be purchased. So now wholesaling is a big thing. And you think about it, it's like, well, we've been on a rocket ship in terms of pricing the past 6-7 years. So there's a big equity base that sellers own, that if you haven't bought a property in the past 2 or 3 years, or you haven't refinanced a property in the past 2 or 3 years, then in general, you have an equity base that is saleable to people like me or other people in Nashville. So that being said, in 2010 it wasn't that way. It was foreclosures are everywhere. The MLS is probably pretty easy pickings in terms of real estate transactions if you want to do fix and flip, which I don't personally like.
Yeah, I used to hear that you could go on there and you could buy 5 houses a week if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like make offers to all these all these REOs, and so. There wasn't this huge equity base, but what you had was you had people that had no other option. And then you had, because bank financing had tightened because of the real estate market, you had a large buyer pool of people that needed owner financing. So my first transaction, just to go through it real quick, I still remember, guys, the voicemail that came through. And I was sitting in my truck, and this was when gas was $4 a gallon, and I could hardly afford gas for my vehicle. And I'm serious. I mean, like, people, I think, kind of brag about how bad things were. Like, I'm being 100% serious about how that was. So my wife was a kindergarten teacher, so we were basically living off of her income. And so I remember the voicemail came in, and I just remember thinking, like, I just don't want to talk to another person. Like, I just don't want to talk to another person. It's like, well, put the big boy panties on, Brad. Like, this is what you wanted.
Yeah, this is business. You got to show up every day.
So I called the guy back, and it was just like any other call. He said, I'm going through a divorce. We're a payment behind, which is very normal then. Very normal.
Yeah, because money's being spent on everything else but
food.
Well, it was that, but the job market was bad. I mean, unemployment was like probably 3 times what it is now. And so...
and most people are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, well, even today, and that's true. So I went to the appointment, and guys, I was terrible at what I did. I had no script work. I had no idea how I was going to get to the contract. But somehow, and it was like the most contentious situation, one of the most contentious situations that I've been in my career. Because it's just like, okay, like let's say this is the table. I'm sitting here, husband and wife. They won't talk to each other. Okay? So, I mean, and it's almost to the point of the wife saying, well, Brad, will you tell my husband that I don't want to talk to him anymore?
That's like sitcom worthy.
Yeah, I'm like, wait a minute, he's right here. Like, I think he heard what you're saying. So, but long story short, they owed $97. I bought it subject to that $97. I began to market it with owner financing at $135, and I got a $20,000 down payment that went to me, and I got a wrap note for roughly, whatever the difference is there, like $20,000. Okay. So that note was mine. It threw off cash flow. And frankly, guys, and I don't recommend this at all, I was so happy with the $20,000 down payment that I forgave the note. But I was like, don't worry about it. I'm good with the 20. I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are good. And the buyer made the payments for years. They ended up selling the house for cash. And it was a great deal for everybody. So we saved a foreclosure. It was my first deal. It gave me a lot of confidence to do what I do now. And it was kind of even bread and butter for what we do today.
Okay, so like the first part of that deal, they were behind on payments, and you put a contract on the house subject to their existing mortgage.
Correct.
So you're not assuming the mortgage, you're just taking
and
it.
So walk us through that process. What does that look like?
In terms of which part?
Well, I mean, so a lot of people, if you're going to take it subject to the mortgage, that mortgage, I'm assuming, would stay in that person's name, correct?
That's right. So it's not a formal assumption, and this is something that we have to have, in my opinion, script work to where we're laying out all the risk for the sellers so that they understand. Now, that being said, the people that we're buying houses from in general are people that have a life situation to where this house is the biggest problem in their life.
So who is the buyer pool or the people that are wanting to agree to that? And like a stranger comes in like, hey, I'll pay your mortgage for you. Cool, I got it. Like who says sounds like that's a good idea?
So the national figures for January of this year was that roughly 32% of mortgage applications were denied that month. So if you think about that in terms of a buyer pool, that in whatever market that you're in right now, say Nashville, which is where we are. 1 out of 3 is... Yeah, so every 2 houses that have sold that quarter, there could have been a third one.
Which is a lot in Davidson County.
That's a hell of a lot of houses.
Yeah. So a lot of commissions, a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. And so then you take that 1/3 and it's like, well, why were they denied? Well, it could be credit score issue. It could be debt to income ratio. It could be job history. It's big 3, okay? Mm-hmm. So what we look for in terms of the owner financing world is we're interested, number one, is what's your cash and cash reserve position. So I want to see that people have a strong down payment, and we've had it as high as $70,000 as a down payment on a $170,000 house. But then the second thing we want to see is cash reserves, and number 3, can you afford the payment? So if someone is roughly at 1/3 of their net income,
it's almost like rent.
Yes, same thing. So so on this house, look, the first deal that I did, by the way, if we look at that, it's like, okay, this house is going into foreclosure if I don't do something. They can't sell this house retail. The buyer has $20,000 cash, and they have a segmented income, husband and wife, both of which make about $40,000
and you're
a
that
year.
buyer.
Well, He's the middleman, basically.
Correct.
So you have an additional buyer.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so I'm putting it under contract to buy, I'm marketing with owner financing, and I'm selling.
Got it.
So a perfect transaction is one where I never own anything, I'm never on title. The only place that I show up is an assignment of note and deed of trust.
So how do you mitigate the risk of the initial seller potentially going through bankruptcy and then messing everything up?
And that happens sometimes. So in the event that our seller goes into bankruptcy, what happens is we can't continue to make payments on that underlying mortgage.
Right.
So I service all of our own papers. So we have a payment coming in, we have a payment going out to the underlying, okay? So if that's a scenario, we can't make a payment going out. So we just hold that money in escrow until it comes out of bankruptcy when we make a lump sum payment, okay? You have to be careful of that. Now, I've had it happen a couple of times, but it's never been a big issue.
Okay, so you're buying is subject to. Your buyer is going to come and he's going to put a note onto your lien that you have.
He's
Or
taking
you
the
assume.
note. He's taking the spread, basically. Like,
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, Brad. Let's say there's a property for $100,000. You market it for $150,000.
Yeah.
Their initial mortgage is $100,000. Then you're going to tap on a down payment of maybe $20,000
To this
and a
person.
$30,000 mortgage on top of that.
That's almost correct. What I would say is that we would do $130K second on that. So the $20,000 down payment would come to me. The $130,000 second would be all inclusive of the first at $100. And the reason that we do it that way as opposed to doing a $30K second is because we would have interest rate arbitrage on that first. So rough figures, we've bought a lot of property that has like a 3.5% first rate position. Okay.
Which is super cheap.
Super cheap because we're selling at 7.9%. So we're making more than the bank is on that in interest on that first position.
Plus you get a
lien.
fat down payment.
Plus we get a down payment. Plus we have 7.9%
On the
spread.
Full, on the full spread. Like, right?
on the note equity position
Right.
that we have. So, it's very rare that we have a note that yields less than 10%. Very rare.
Because the buyer, they are paying higher rates because they can't get a loan anywhere else.
Correct. And so it comes down to people want to own a home. So they do get the tax benefits. They can write off the property taxes and
They don't have to look
and
at
the
their
interest.
credit.
Yeah, I'm not interested in credit. I don't really care what people's credit position is. What I'm interested in is cash and cash reserves. And does the payment make sense based on the income? So, and we have to be careful because sometimes people will say, well, I make $2,000 a month net. I want this $1,400 payment. And I'm just like,
Nope.
I'm not setting you up to be in a position
Right.
to succeed in that scenario. And then it becomes almost an issue of ethics because sometimes people have $30,000 to put down, but they can't afford the payment.
Right, because they're basically
And-
bleeding
sure.
income because it's a higher debt to income
And they're in
ratio.
a really desperate situation.
Yeah, so they've inherited money or they had a lawsuit or something that happened where they have some cash but they don't have income. And, so some people's, especially on like the lease purchase side, which is very different from what I do, they want to be in a position where they are going to double dip. So they sell a house on a lease purchase, they get it back. They do it again, they get it back. They do it again and get it back. I don't want that. It's like I want to put the paper in position and then they make the payment over time and then they cash me out. Like that's a perfect position for me.
So you're in the middle. You're responsible for paying the bank's original mortgage. That's your
Yes and
responsibility.
no. Well, it's not my legal responsibility.
No, it's the
Well, it's-
buyers.
Correct. So, and part
It's
of
like
our
an
script work-
assignment. Like that middle kind of goes away.
Well, in our script work, we don't ever guarantee payments to the seller. We tell them, look, so here's kind of the script. And it's been a long time since I've run it, so we'll kind of stumble through it. With everything today, Greg, there's a disclaimer. So you go to McDonald's and it says caution coffee hot. As
This
if we
will
didn't
burn
know.
you if you pour it in your
Correct.
lap.
So here's my disclaimer in what we do. If Great Depression number 2 happens, or if World War III happens, or if something happens to where I get a bunch of houses back in 1 month, I can handle it for a while. But what I don't guarantee to you is that you don't get a call from me saying, hey, Greg, we've had to take a bunch of houses back at one time. If you want to protect your credit, you're going to have to make a few months payments until I can get this thing resold. Now, that could happen. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. It's never happened in the past. But it's me basically saying never say never.
Do they know you're selling the house to somebody else?
Absolutely. So one of the
So what is the benefit to them?
Well, the benefit to them,
So you're almost brokering the deal for them.
Well,
Because you have the
is
skill.
a hell of a word, as you know.
True.
But so the benefit to them is that the transaction is done.
And they don't have to actually do it.
Correct.
And they don't find the other people. They don't put the deal together.
Right. So
Most of these people probably have, I'm assuming, no idea how to do a lot of this.
Well,
they don't. But some of these are very low equity situations, which is kind of why I'm anti-wholesaling. We take, say, 10 motivated sellers. And a motivated seller to me in my business is someone that falls into basically 5 categories. They are a tired landlord, they've inherited something they don't want, they're going through a divorce, they're pre-foreclosure, or they have a health or safety issue. And I say safety because we bought houses from people that are being abused, which is a terrible situation.
Yeah.
But that being said, if that is their life circumstance, and this house is the final thing that they have to remove so that they can move on with their life, then as long as we are able to negotiate with our script work in a way that is really strong, which we have, and we've kind of predicated on years at this point, then we're able to deal structure in a way that most people can't. So we take 10 motivated seller leads that a wholesaler gets. It's like, what would you guys say that wholesaler can close in terms of transactions? So they have 10 people call them. They are all 5.
probably one.
Yeah, maybe. 1 or maybe 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're in Nashville, 0.1.
Yeah.
We can do deals with all 10, which is why I say that wholesalers are leaving more money on the table than they're actually making. Because if they can do 2 deals and we can do 10, I mean, our cost in marketing is lower per contract.
Cost per lead.
Cost per lead is lower. So it's like, I talked to a national wholesaler, and this is an acquaintance of mine. Pretty well-known guy. So in terms of the real estate community, somebody that probably all of us would know. And he said, I'm in those ballpark $4,400 in marketing per contract, and his gross profit per wholesale deal is $12,000.
Yeah,
and it's like,
that's pretty average.
Yeah, and it's like, you might as well sell real estate. And this guy did over 250 transactions in 1 year. If he had transferred into creating paper, which is what we do, he'd have made like probably 10 times that. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, what's being lost out there.
So what happens in a situation where they just owe more than it's worth?
Well, it depends on how much. So in general, we can bump the value up some based on just offering the financing.
Yes, I'm assuming if you're also... Well, no, go on. Actually, I'll come back to that thought.
Okay. So we can bump the price up based on offering the owner financing. So if they owe $200... All right, so let me back up. We bought a house in Sevierville about 2 weeks ago. It had been on the market for $185. We bought
the MLS?
Yes, for $185. They owed $175. So the seller was just trying to break even, hopefully.
With realtor fees, there's no way.
Yeah, well, which is hopefully, maybe. But so the seller's daughter lived in the house. She was kind of a pack rat. She wouldn't let anybody in the house, which is kind of the sort of situations you deal with sometimes. And so we bought it for $175 subject to. We're currently set to sell it for $225 with $20K down. So that kind of gives you an idea of the difference in the owner finance market versus the retail market. Now, another couple of things I don't have. I don't have a home inspection, although the buyer can do that if they choose. I don't have an appraisal. I don't have to bring it up to a certain condition. And so I'm getting a down payment, which is on this deal as good or better than what a wholesaler could do. I'm also capturing a note, which pays me off in the future. Plus I get monthly cash flow on that. And it's probably beyond the scope of this podcast because I'd have to draw it out. But anytime you wrap something at a higher interest rate than the underlying mortgage is, then that note actually appreciates. So first position liens as notes depreciate, wraps generally appreciate. So, that's kind of a situation in which what happens if somebody owes as much as the house is worth or maybe a little bit more. Depending on the quality of the house, sometimes we can still make something work. But in general, it's tougher, but it's possible.
So does the appreciation or the price really matter if somebody's just going to pay more than the note anyway? If you're going to make 4 or 5% on your note?
Yes and no. So I'm kind of to the point now where my note equity position has to be $30,000 or more for me to have interest in servicing that note. So even though we may be able to take a house that's worth $200, sell it for $200, and make $300 a month. I just don't want to deal with that unless, let's say it's worth 200, we sell it for 210, and the underlying's 180. Like, that's something that I can deal with.
Is that just because of the portfolio you've built up and your level of risk tolerance as you've grown and gotten bigger? Or is it just because the longer you've done this, the more you realize, like, I used to think this was a deal, but it's actually not. It's more of
I never really thought that was a deal. So, one of my main things is we're equity buyers. So equity first, cash flow second. And the thing is that I'm really saying the same thing, because if you have an equity position, then cash flow should always follow. Right? People will say, oh, well, I want to own 100 doors at $200 a month. That sounds just ridiculous to me. It's like, for me, let me own 100 doors with this equity position, and the cash flow will automatically happen.
Right.
And that's my main thing. Equity first.
So then, in regards to all this financing stuff that you've done for pretty much all your career, is there like a specific deal from this last year that kind of jumps out there, like, hey, I learned a ton, but this was also really unique, and it was a great spread, but it was also maybe more work than normal, or something unique to it that kind of stands out? Or are most of your deals pretty like straightforward? This is kind of the box that we buy in, and if it's kind of not in that box, then...
Well, I would say that our box is not having a box. So I'll tell you a couple of deals that kind of come to mind. One of which is a seller that I'm probably going to have to file a restraining order on even today, even though we did her transaction almost a year ago.
Wow.
So if you do real estate long enough, you're going to have some crazy people. So,
Yes.
I know you guys probably don't resonate with that, but in my career and what I do, you deal with some crazy people. So we bought a property that was pre-foreclosure in Portland, okay? And ballparking it, she owed $85,000. No, she owed $80,000. I was giving her $15,000. Okay, that's what she said. She says, I owe $80,000. Here's the mortgage statement. I want $15,000. We're like, okay, cool.
15 on top, I'm assuming.
Correct. So it's $15,000 walk away. We're taking the $80,000 subject to, and then so we say, look, we're going to put our buyer in place. I'm selling this thing with owner financing, everything that we do. And so she says, great. So we put a buyer in place for $180,000. So $180,000 with like $15,000 down.
So it's an $85,000 spread.
Yeah, which is pretty good. So we go to closing. And I have to hand it to Rudy Title on this. So Rudy Title, if any of you guys are listening, I appreciate you guys. Y'all are smarter than me.
If you need title stuff, give him a shout. John Glees, I think we all use him pretty much.
All you guys, yeah.
So some people from Rudy said, we're not 100% comfortable with this seller. We feel like she may have a drug problem. She came here very early in the morning, had way too much energy, sort of thing. And I was like, okay. And they said, look,
you're reading in between the lines, like, I'm having
they're
issues.
saying some things that they're not really saying, and I understand.
Oh, yeah.
So, they said, look, we'll create the docs, but we don't want to close it. I'm like, well, that's fine. So they already had the title search, they had the payoffs, everything. Well, the payoff was like $5,000 higher than what the seller told us, and so we go to close it at a notary at her bank, and my guy Tony, who's been with me for years, called me and said that was the worst closing I've ever done, and that's out of years. So I was like, well, what happened? He said she started screaming at me. We're trying to fraud her, all this stuff, and we're like, well, why? He said, well, the payoff was higher than what she thought it was. I'm like, well, we didn't generate the payoff.
Yeah,
her bank generated the payoff, and the HUD was done by a real estate law office. So I felt vindicated for sure. So what I did is I called the seller and I said, look, you have my check for $10,000 at this point, correct? She said yes. I'm like, okay. Well, I have the title work and everything from this closing, but it sounds like you're not happy. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm on my way to Portland right now, and I'm going to meet you. And you can hand me the check back, and I'll tear it up in front of you. And I'm going to tear up the deed and all of the paperwork and hand it back to you. Does that sound fair? Because you sound like you don't think this transaction's fair. So I want to let you out. You can go do something else that you want to do. She said, well, I don't want to do that. I want my $10,000. I'm like,
you're like,
I'm confused, So, long story short, she agreed. Okay, I'm going to close. She went away for like 60 days, and then after that, she's pestered the buyers about a storage shed, all this stuff. And so, long story short, we're going to probably have to file some type of
restraining
order on her because she just keeps interfering. The second deal that I think is kind of interesting is one that we got was 0% owner financing. So anytime that there's a lien, we want to take it subject to. Anytime that there's a free and clear property, we want 0% owner financing. And so on this deal, let's see, I guess we got time. Yeah. On this deal, it was worth like 150 grand. We were buying it for 70, 15,000 down, and I think 400 per month at 0%. So when we talk about things in terms of present value, and this is why I say price is a function of terms and that deal structure is more important than price. So in this kind of a scenario, in terms of present value today, because that $70,000 that I purchased it for is paid over time, the real amount paid today is far lower than what $70,000 is. So we can discount each payment in the future back to present value. Okay, and that's a finance term. So the funny thing is, we bought it 70,000, 15 down. We go to exit out of this thing. So this guy's owed what, $55,000 in note over time. He calls us and says, like, 2 weeks later after closing, I'm out of cash. I need to be paid off. And I'm like, well, we're going to pay you off. $400 per month until paid. You know, this is what you agreed to. He says, no, I need cash faster than that. So I'm going to make you a deal you can't refuse. I'm like, well, I'm in.
Let's talk.
Yeah, let's hear. Okay,
like, those are always
cool.
good.
You know? So he's owed 55. He says, well, if you'll pay me off today, I'll accept 30.
Whoa.
And I'm like, I don't know. Let me think about it.
Right, because you don't show your cards even when they...
Well, I don't have cards. In general...
Right, he's got the note.
Yeah.
Well, whenever we're negotiating, we never give a price. We never give terms. So the people are effectively negotiating with themselves. And so it's kind of the same thing in reverse here. So he's owed 55. He just said he would accept 30. I said, let me think about it. He calls me back the next day, 25. Let me think about it.
This guy's desperate.
He comes back the next day, 18. He comes down to 12. And I'm like, fine.
Sounds like crack is involved or something.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what it is, but it's not my business to know.
Right.
And then he sells me another house. He sells me another house. Now, I've only had a couple of people that were repeat buyers or sellers. And I've had one house in my career where I bought it twice from different people, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
But those are two different transactions that I think are kind of interesting. One, just because it was good deal structure, but we had kind of a crazy person. The second one was really great deal structure, and then negotiating themselves down on their promissory note. And so...
so whatever happened at the end result?
I sold it for like 165.
But you paid him off at 18?
I paid him off at 12.
12.
Yeah, I paid him off at 12.
And you'd paid him 15 down, so you bought the house for 27.
27, sold it for...
165 with probably, 20 grand down or something like that?
No, I actually retailed out cash.
Oh, you're just like, let's throw it on the market and get done with this.
Be done with it.
Yeah.
That's a nice little payday.
It wasn't bad.
Cool. Well, all right. Well, I appreciate you coming out here and letting us know about all these owner financing reps. I'm sure there's questions. I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
I think we got a few questions.
Do we?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Amanda says, other than the way he does business, what's the next best way to run a real estate business, in your opinion?
So, say it one more time.
What's the next best way to run a real estate business, in your opinion, besides what Brad...
Besides owner financing? Like another strategy?
Yes.
Interesting.
I think that... That's a great question. I've never heard the question put exactly like that, so I appreciate that.
It's like,
take
what you do out of
not
the
going to do
situation.
what you
everything
do.
out that you believe in.
If you
It's
could
like,
reinvent
what
the
if you
wheel,
didn't
what would you
believe
do?
in
Here's a better thing. Here's what I'm thinking. It's like, she's like, you know what? I can't wrap my head around that right now. What do I do before? What do I need to learn before I do that?
Or maybe is there a book or something that you'd recommend? Like,
So how do you learn owner financing? Basically, is what this
I
goes
think
to.
you have to have a good mentor. So my mentor is David Alexander. He's based out of Dallas, and he started me back 10 plus years ago. And without David is today, and I've been in this business and around people that the ones listening to this would know their names. David is still by far the best deal structure guy I've ever seen in my career. And the fact that I started with him first is just like amazing luck. You know, super blessed to have David. I think you have to have somebody to walk you through this kind of stuff. That being said, what would I be doing if owner financing didn't exist? I would still be an equity buyer. And so to create equity purchases, and I say equity, we're buying like 60 cents on the dollar to ballpark it. You have to have really good lead generation. You have to have really good negotiation that allows you to go to the deal structure that you want to go to. So you have to have all three of those things to create a successful company, in my opinion.
And you have to be able to run your numbers well. I mean, you're obviously a numbers guy.
Well, the accounting helps.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? No other questions? Okay, cool. Well, guys, appreciate you tuning in. If you need to get in touch with Brad, what's the best way to get in touch with you, man?
So add me as a friend on Facebook. I also have my podcast, Investor Creator, on iTunes, so check me out there.
Anything specific you're looking for right now?
So wholesaler friends of mine, if you have a deal that's about to expire, you don't know what to do with because it's not at that 60 to 70% minus repairs, reach out to us. We can make it work.
Yeah. Because if there's equity there and you can finance it, then
Yeah.
For sure. Cool. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. This was episode 3. Greg Faricelli, David Morgan, Brad Smotherman. It's been a real pleasure. We'll see y'all again on episode 4.
Have a wonderful weekend.
See you guys.